Hey guys, tonight we drift into the soft folds of time, where the world is quieter, and the hum of your own thoughts slows to a crawl. You lie back and imagine yourself in a place without glowing screens, without traffic horns, without the midnight glow of billboards, just firelight flickering, shadows stretching along stone walls, and silence so deep you hear your own breath. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your eyes open, because we're about to wander into some of the sleepiest stories history has to offer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You close your eyes and let yourself float backward into an ancient world where sleep is not yet explained with brain scans or sleep cycles, but with myth, magic, and whispered warnings. In Mesopotamia, priests look at the drifting patterns of your dreams and claim they are little telegrams from the gods. You are told to be cautious. One slip, one dream misread, and you might offend a deity before breakfast. Even the lull of night is not safe. People believe the boundary between waking and sleeping was thin enough for spirits to slip through. And there you are, curled up on a reed mat, trying to rest, only to be warned that sleep could be the moment your soul decides to wander. A more cheerful neighbor in Egypt insists otherwise. For them, sleep is a gift from the divine, a rehearsal for eternity. Dreams scribbled down on papyrus become a catalog of omens. Whether you will prosper in harvest, find love, or step into misfortune. Mainstream history notes how Egyptian dream books were passed around like practical manuals. Yet hidden between the lines is a quirky tidbit. Some people actually slept in temples, hoping their dreams would be personally crafted by the gods. Imagine checking yourself in like a guest, except your pillow talk is literally with Horus. You shift again and find yourself in ancient Greece. Philosophers gather to argue with solemn faces, claiming that sleep either cools the blood or allows the soul to take nightly field trips. Historians still argue whether Aristotle actually believed the brain was a radiator, but it's a surprisingly cozy image. Your skull as a water tank, gently releasing steam at night. Somewhere, a sleepy Greek farmer snores under a blanket, unconcerned that Plato is probably debating whether his spirit is off shopping in a celestial marketplace. Through all of this, you sense a shared unease. Sleep was necessary, yes, but also suspicious. Too much of it might mean laziness. Too little might signal possession. And everyone feared the idea of never waking up. Yet you smile faintly at the thought. Humanity spent thousands of years inventing stories just to explain why you, right now, are nestled under your blanket, listening, drifting. And if you're still with me, hovering in that space between focus and drowsiness, maybe tap that like button and subscribe. It helps me keep spinning these long, sleepy tales for you. You drift onward, carried gently from those first hazy myths into the warm sands of ancient Egypt, where dreams themselves become maps, guides, and sometimes courtroom witnesses. The air smells faintly of frankincense, the faint sweetness clinging to your skin as you move slowly past walls covered in hieroglyphs. Torches flicker. Shadows lean and stretch across painted gods, and you catch yourself breathing in rhythm with the hush of the Nile outside. Here, you discover that sleep is not simply closing your eyes. It is a conversation, an interview with forces bigger than yourself. You find yourself seated beside a scribe, unrolling a fragile sheet of papyrus. His reed pen scratches softly, and you lean over his shoulder to see neat columns. A dream of eating crocodile meat foretells good fortune, while dreaming of onions might mean an argument in the marketplace. Historians still argue whether these dream manuals were treated as serious science or light-hearted entertainment. But you can picture anxious farmers clutching them like weather forecasts. A bad dream could make you skip sowing altogether, while a hopeful one might send you striding confidently into the fields. Mainstream history agrees that Egyptians placed great weight on dreams as divine messages. But there's a quirkier angle too. You learn of dream incubation, the practice of sleeping inside temples dedicated to gods like Serapis or Imhotep, the patron of healing. Worshippers would lay themselves on cold stone floors, praying to dream of cures for sickness, or perhaps to glimpse their fates. You imagine yourself lying there, stiff-backed, hoping for a vision, while a priest paces silently nearby, ready to interpret whatever bizarre, half-conscious images you mutter about in your sleep. You might dream of a golden cat chasing a beetle, and suddenly someone decides that means your cousin owes you money. The night deepens around you, and you slip into another chamber where painted reliefs glow in lamplight. They depict gods bending down toward dreamers, whispering secrets into their ears. You can almost feel the tickle of a divine breath brushing your cheek. Egyptians didn't see sleep as passive. It was a ritual, a stage performance in which your body lay still, but your soul took center role, wandering between gods and the dead. Some scholars even argue that without these nightly journeys, Egyptians might never have imagined the afterlife so vividly. Dreams rehearsed eternity, letting you test the waters of death without ever drowning. You pause and listen. Outside, the Nile sloshes quietly against its banks, a lullaby that has played for thousands of years. A fisherman snores in his boat. A child turns restlessly on a reed mat, and high priests prepare incense for yet another seeker of divine dreams. It is both deeply ordinary and magnificently strange. Everyone must sleep, but here, sleep is theater, medicine, and cosmic negotiation all in one. You stroll deeper into the night, noticing that Egyptians weren't entirely united in their opinions. Some considered dreams divine truth. Others saw them as muddled echoes of the day. Historians still argue whether the common people believed every dream had significance, or whether they rolled their eyes at the more dramatic interpretations. Either way, the papyri survive, proof that dream analysis has always had its customers. You shift, and suddenly you're not in a temple anymore, but in a bustling market at dusk. The air smells of bread, dust, and a faint tang of sweat. You watch a merchant pause, worried. He dreamt of broken jars, and today he hesitates to unpack his wares. A neighbor teases him gently, reminding him that dreams are slippery things. You smile faintly, realizing that even 4,000 years ago, people were already debating the value of dream interpretation, not unlike your coworker rolling their eyes when someone talks about Mercury in retrograde. And yet, there is something tender about it. People wanted answers. They wanted reassurance in the quietest hours of the night. When their bodies gave way to sleep, they needed to believe that their minds were doing important work, communicating with the divine, sorting out destiny, or protecting them from unseen threats. Maybe you've felt that too. That urge to believe a strange dream meant more than random neurons firing. Perhaps when you woke from a particularly vivid one, you reached for your phone to search its meaning. The digital version of an Egyptian priest scribbling away by lamplight. The humor slips in too. You picture some poor sleeper tossing and turning, muttering nonsense, only to have it taken down as a cosmic revelation. What if your dream of running late to school in your pajamas would have been recorded as an omen of royal upheaval. Some part of you chuckles, grateful your modern dreams of missed Wi-Fi signals don't get turned into prophecies of empire collapse. Still, as you glide through these chambers, a hush settles. The Egyptians teach you that sleep is not wasted time. It's a dialogue, an event, a necessary stage where humans meet the vast unknown. And whether or not the gods truly whispered through dreams, the belief itself gave comfort, structure, and perhaps even courage to drift into sleep night after night. The air grows warmer, thicker, as if the desert itself is pressing close, and you feel your body sink a little deeper into relaxation. The flicker of oil lamps, the rustle of papyrus, the faint buzz of insects near the river, everything feels timeless. And just as your thoughts blur at the edges, you remember you're on a journey that won't stop here. From temples to philosophers, from myths to debates, humanity has always chased the mystery of why we close our eyes and drift away. So, as you lie here with me in this echoing temple, let yourself stretch a little further into the cushions. Let your breath match the Nile's rhythm, and prepare to follow these sleepy footsteps onward into Greece, where the next layer of myth and philosophy waits. You step softly out of the torch-lit corridors of Egypt and find yourself wandering along a stone path that curves through olive groves. The night air is lighter here, tinged with the sharp scent of herbs and the faint buzz of crickets. Somewhere nearby, a goat bell jingles lazily, as if even animals cannot be bothered to stay awake. You drift into the company of philosophers, those infamous Greeks who insisted on taking every simple human act and turning it into a subject worthy of endless debate. Tonight, they argue over sleep. Not farming, not politics, not theater, but sleep itself. Why you do it, what it means, and what dangers or wonders it hides. You take a seat at the edge of the gathering. A young man holds a clay lamp aloft while Socrates or someone like him leans forward, brows knitted, as though the fate of Athens depends on tonight's conclusion. To them, sleep is not just rest. It is a puzzle, a strange state, where the mind seems active even while the body lies slack. One philosopher insists that sleep occurs because the heart cools and needs recovery, that the body's fire must dim each night before being stoked again at dawn. Another counters that the soul itself wanders, leaving the body inert while it explores invisible realms. Historians still argue whether these theories were meant to be literal science or metaphor. But you cannot help smiling at the image. Your soul is a tourist, carrying a small satchel, slipping out each night to see the sights. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Aristotle devoted entire treatises to the subject. He wrote that sleep came when digestion released vapors that traveled to the brain, cooling it and inducing rest. If this sounds unappealing, remember that medicine of the time involved balancing humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, as though your body were a bubbling stew pot in need of careful stirring. You imagine Aristotle peering at you drowsily, muttering about stomach fumes, while you secretly wish he would try counting sheep instead. But the quirky tidbit you overhear is even more peculiar. Some early thinkers believed dreams were produced by divine messengers sneaking into your mind, inserting symbolic images like secret notes. One account suggests that sleep was a dangerous threshold, that mischievous spirits could creep in while your soul wandered. You picture yourself locking the door behind your own departing spirit, just in case an uninvited guest decides to redecorate your dreamscape with embarrassing material. Nothing like being haunted by celestial graffiti. The debates do not end there. Some philosophers argue that dreams are simply echoes of the day, shadows left over by sensory impressions. Others insist dreams can predict the future, offering glimpses of events not yet unfolded. Historians still argue whether the Greeks genuinely believed all dreams were prophetic, or whether they recognized, even then, that some dreams were little more than indigestion dramatized. Imagine Plato sighing deeply, while his neighbor insists last night's dream of flying goats must be an omen of war. The night presses on. You hear the soft rustle of robes as these men, and occasionally women too, pace back and forth in moonlight. Olive leaves shimmer silver. Cicadas buzz like 1,000 tiny gears turning, and you feel yourself rocked gently by the rhythm of voices. Every sentence drifts into the next, calm and repetitive, as though designed to lull you into the very state they are analyzing. You glance toward the city, where most Athenians are not debating, but simply sleeping. Farmers sprawled on mats, soldiers curled on benches, children clinging to mothers' sides. They do not need theories. They need rest, yet even they are not free from the whispers of philosophy, for tales of prophetic dreams circulate widely. A merchant might cancel a journey because he dreamt of a broken cart, while a bride-to-be might tremble after seeing snakes in her sleep. The blending of superstition and speculation turns every morning into a guessing game. Should you trust your dreams or laugh at them? You imagine yourself at a symposium, reclining on a couch, cup of wine in hand. Someone drones on about sleep vapors. Another challenges with a counterexample, and you yawn discreetly. Here, you realize, the true charm lies not in the answers, but in the sheer human need to ask questions about the most ordinary experiences. Sleep is universal, and therefore irresistible to minds determined to label, measure, and dissect everything. Yet there is a comic side, too. Imagine trying to explain to Aristotle that in 2,000 years, people would sip hot tea, slip under electric blankets, and wear silk sleep masks. He might nod gravely, then insist that it must be because the stomach vapors are stronger under electricity. You chuckle softly, realizing that even brilliant minds can dress nonsense in serious clothing. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words feels about right. So here's one more. If your soul truly wandered each night, it would at least have the courtesy to bring back souvenirs. Perhaps a postcard. Greetings from the dream realm. Wish you were here. The discussions ripple outward, touching on memory, imagination, and even madness. Some warn that too much sleep weakens the body. Others claim too little makes you reckless. The truth, you realize, is that even now, humanity cannot fully agree on the right amount of sleep. 8 hours, 7, 9. It seems we are still hosting the same symposium under different lights. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks had segmented sleep like medieval people would later practice, or whether they truly lay down for a single, uninterrupted night. The records are blurry, like half-remembered dreams themselves. As the gathering winds down, the philosophers recline deeper into cushions, voices slowing, words lengthening. The lamp flickers low, shadows grow thick. One final thought hovers in the air. If sleep is so mysterious, maybe it is not meant to be solved, but savored. You let that idea sink in, feeling the weight of centuries of curiosity pressing lightly on your eyelids. The crickets continue, the olive branches sway, and the marble steps beneath you feel cool, grounding. You know the debate is not over. Philosophers never truly conclude anything. But you rise gently, leaving them to their murmurs. Ahead, the Roman world waits with its rituals, its incense, and its noisy neighbors, ready to add another layer to humanity's long, slow search for rest. You take one last breath of Mediterranean night, then step forward into history's next chapter. Your feet light, your mind already softened by the steady hum of ancient questions. You ease out of the olive groves and find yourself wandering Roman streets just as twilight slides into full night. The paving stones still hold the day's heat, and the air is thick with smoke from cooking fires. You hear the distant clatter of a cart, the occasional bark of a dog, and closer to you, the murmur of neighbors complaining that once again the insula walls are too thin to block out noise. Sleep in Rome is never purely private. You realize quickly that bedtime here is less about gentle silence and more about negotiating with the entire city to quiet down. Inside one villa, you glimpse wealthy Romans preparing themselves for the night. A servant stirs a brazier, the scent of cedar wood curling through the atrium. Someone pours watered wine, just enough to relax the nerves without inducing tomorrow's headache. Mainstream history tells you that Romans were fond of rituals, even for sleep, burning incense, sipping mulled drinks, and placing charms under pillows. To them, these weren't superstitions, but small guarantees against restlessness. You imagine yourself reclining on a couch, sipping spiced wine, convincing yourself that surely this concoction is the secret to undisturbed dreams. And yet, beyond those polished walls, ordinary Romans improvise their own nighttime routines. Families pile onto straw mattresses crammed into tiny rooms. You hear a baby fussing, an old man coughing, and somewhere upstairs, a couple whispering arguments loud enough for half the block to hear. Roman sleep is communal, noisy, layered. You chuckle softly, realizing that earplugs would have been a bestseller in the forum. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Some Romans swore by charms against nightmares, including tying certain herbs around the neck or muttering protective phrases before bed. Pliny the Elder cataloged cures ranging from the sensible to the absurd, like eating roasted dormice or wearing amulets carved with odd symbols. You picture yourself trying to nod off with a garlic clove dangling from your neck, wondering if the only real effect is that no one wants to share your bed. Still, not all nights were carefree. You notice how the city itself shapes sleep. Noise is constant. Taverns stay open, water wheels creak, and the Tiber flows with barges at all hours. Historians still argue whether Romans truly valued deep sleep, or whether they accepted constant interruption as part of urban life. Perhaps sleep was lighter, more fragile, a series of naps strung together rather than one long plunge into unconsciousness. Either way, the complaints survive. Letters and plays where writers grumble about sleepless nights thanks to their neighbors' parties or the hammering of craftsmen. You smile, because 2,000 years later, you might be muttering the same about upstairs renovations or a car alarm that refuses to quit. The wealthy had their own way of handling the problem. Large beds with curtains, designed to block drafts and dull the din. You step into one such chamber, seeing silken fabric draped around a carved wooden frame. The bed is elevated, layered with blankets, and large enough for 2 or 3 companions. Privacy is relative, but comfort is clearly prioritized. You stretch out on the mattress, feeling the weight of woven linens, and for a moment you almost drift into the kind of sleep that only luxury allows. Yet just as your eyes flutter, a sudden clang jolts you awake. Outside, the streets still bustle. Carts unload grain under torchlight, slaves hurry with buckets, and guards patrol noisily in armor. In Rome, the city never sleeps fully. It only dozes. You think again of those ordinary citizens lying on their mats, resigned to noise as a fact of life. The gentle sarcasm rises in you. You wonder if the real Roman lullaby was simply exhaustion so deep that no hammering could keep you awake. But Rome also held a fascination with dreams. Just as Egyptians recorded dream omens, Romans treated nocturnal visions as possible signs from the gods. Temples dedicated to Asclepius welcomed the sick, who hoped for healing dreams. Generals, too, sometimes based decisions on dream imagery. One tale tells of a soldier dreaming of victory before battle, only for the commander to take it as divine confirmation. You smirk, realizing that your own dream about showing up to work without pants would probably not inspire military confidence. Still, Romans worried about sleep's fragility. Doctors of the time advised against eating heavy meals before bed, warning that indigestion would provoke disturbing dreams. They suggested sleeping on one's right side, opening windows for fresh air, and sometimes massaging the feet with oils. The advice feels oddly familiar, like an ancient version of modern sleep hygiene. You can imagine a Roman matron shaking her head at her son's bad habits, insisting he drink fennel tea instead of wine if he wants to avoid nightmares. The atmosphere shifts as you walk through narrow alleys where lamps burn low. Sleep here is not solemn, but practical. Bodies sprawled on cots, cloaks doubling as blankets, soldiers napping at guard posts. You notice the mix of classes, the contrast between velvet and straw, incense and garlic charms. For Romans, sleep was not uniform. It mirrored society itself, divided, chaotic, yet threaded by the same human need. Humor lingers even in these moments. You picture some Roman citizen lying awake, staring at the ceiling, cursing the racket outside, and thinking, surely the gods invented insomnia as punishment for my sins. 2,000 years later, you lie in your own bed, muttering the same about your neighbor's late-night karaoke. Time collapses, and suddenly, insomnia feels eternal. The night stretches on, stars wheeling slowly overhead, casting faint light over tiled roofs. In courtyards, fountains splash gently, a rare soothing note amid the clamor. Somewhere in the Palatine Palace, an emperor reclines, his mind crowded with paranoia, fearing betrayal in sleep as much as in waking life. Perhaps his slumber is shallow, haunted by visions of daggers. Sleep, even in its quietest form, never frees you completely from your anxieties. And so you drift with them, through streets alive with noise and chambers heavy with incense, realizing that Romans treated sleep as both necessity and luxury. It was the pause between banquets, the break from endless politics, the fragile shield against nightly chaos. Whether on straw mats or curtained couches, every Roman eventually yielded to exhaustion, lulled not by silence, but by the sheer inevitability of rest. You feel the weight of it now, the inevitability seeping into your own body. Your breath deepens, your limbs grow heavy, and yet you remain curious. What happens after Rome, when the medieval world reshapes the night? You turn slowly toward that darker horizon, where bells toll and sleep is carved into segments, where midnight is no longer silent, but full of prayer. With one last glance at the restless city, you step forward, leaving Roman rituals behind, ready to discover how the Middle Ages divided the night. You leave behind the restless hum of Roman streets and step carefully into the Middle Ages, where the night itself changes shape. The cool air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp hay, and you notice at once that darkness feels thicker here, as though lanterns and candles cannot quite chase it away. Villages fall quiet after sundown, not with the chatter of Rome, but with a stillness broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the call of an owl. This is where you first encounter a rhythm that feels foreign to modern life: the divided night, the habit of sleeping in two distinct portions rather than one long stretch. You settle on a rough bench near the hearth of a timbered cottage. A family curls up around the fire, children drifting to sleep first, their small bodies huddled under coarse woolen blankets. The flames glow low, and for a few hours the house is at peace. Yet, just past midnight, you hear movement. The father stirs, then the mother, then the older children. No one seems alarmed. This is the natural interval, what later writers would call first sleep and second sleep. After several hours of slumber, people rise to tend to small tasks: stoking the fire, checking on animals, whispering prayers, or even paying social visits. You marvel at how ordinary it seems to them, though to you it feels like an odd disruption. Mainstream history confirms that segmented sleep was widespread in medieval Europe. People expected to wake in the middle of the night and remain alert for an hour or two before lying down again. One scholar even found court records describing confessions of crimes committed during the interval between sleeps, as though it were an officially recognized part of the daily schedule. You picture the local bailiff rolling his eyes at yet another midnight complaint about stolen chickens. Yet alongside the normalcy lurks a quirkier detail. Some people believed this in-between time was especially charged with spiritual significance. Rising at midnight meant you were awake at the very hour demons or angels might be wandering. Some households used the interval for quiet devotion, kneeling by the hearth to recite psalms. Others, less pious, treated it as a chance to slip next door for gossip or romance. You imagine a medieval villager whispering to a neighbor, "I'll meet you after first sleep," as though arranging a secret midnight rendezvous. Historians still argue whether this interval was embraced cheerfully or endured reluctantly, but evidence suggests many saw it as simply part of the rhythm of life. You stretch and glance around the cottage. A jug of ale is passed, bread is broken, and for a brief while, the house feels alive again. Outside, the stars glimmer cold and steady, unbroken by street lamps or neon. You realize that without artificial light, people's bodies responded naturally to darkness in stages. The first bout of sleep came early, just after sunset, and the second closer to dawn. What seems bizarre now was once simply practical. As you listen to the family's murmured voices, you think about how this custom contrasts with modern obsession over unbroken 8 hours. Imagine telling a medieval farmer he needed to sleep straight through without rising. He would probably laugh and tell you that only the dead rest so long. It reminds you that sleep, like so many things, is cultural, shifting with technology and expectation. What feels natural in one century feels peculiar in another. The atmosphere grows more intimate as you notice how people use this wakeful interval for reflection. Some scribes took advantage of it, lighting candles to write letters or copy texts. Lovers found privacy in it, while others turned to prayer, convinced that their petitions carried more weight in the hushed hours. You can almost hear the creak of a quill scratching on parchment, the soft rustle of straw as someone shifts, the faint hiss of logs settling in the fire. It is strangely soothing, this sense of shared quiet activity across the whole village. Of course, not everyone found comfort in it. You imagine the weary laborer sighing when his body stirs after only a few hours, longing for uninterrupted rest. Even in the Middle Ages, not all customs suited everyone. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universal or more common among certain classes or regions. Records suggest variation, but the idea of first and second sleep appears often enough to convince you it was deeply embedded in daily life. Humor slips into the scene, too. Picture a medieval teenager rolling over, groaning that they do not want to rise after first sleep, only to be nudged awake by a stern parent insisting chores await even at midnight. You chuckle quietly, because some things never change. Teenagers have always resisted inconvenient awakenings. Another small joke comes to mind. If you ever complain about your alarm clock, remember that medieval villagers sometimes relied on the crow of a rooster, which, inconveniently, did not always crow at the same time. As the family prepares to lie down again, you feel the weight of this pattern pressing on you. The second sleep stretches ahead, meant to carry them into dawn. You hear whispered prayers as they settle back into blankets, hoping dreams will bring insight or reassurance. Some even recorded that dreams during second sleep were clearer, easier to interpret, as though the mind had already purged its clutter in the first round. You smile, thinking of it like cleaning your mental desk before returning to work. The night deepens further. Outside, frost settles on thatched roofs, animals huddle in pens, and silence creeps back over the land. You realize that this custom gave people not just rest, but also time. Time to think. Time to pray. Time to connect. Perhaps there is something we have lost in trading segmented sleep for our modern ideal of efficiency. Perhaps the night held more texture then, more gentle pauses that gave life rhythm. As you step quietly out of the cottage, you notice other lights flickering in windows across the village. You are not alone in wakefulness. A blacksmith checks his forge. A mother nurses her infant. A priest paces while rehearsing tomorrow's sermon. The whole community shares this in-between space, half waking, half dreaming. You take a deep breath, the cold night filling your lungs, and marvel at how natural it feels to them, how strange to you. Your eyes lift to the sky where stars blaze fiercely, unchallenged by artificial glow. You feel small beneath them, yet comforted. Humanity has always adapted to the night, carving out meaning from its darkness. The segmented sleep of the Middle Ages had only one version, one chapter in the long history of rest. And as you drift onward, you sense another layer waiting just ahead. The solemn midnight prayers of monastic life, where waking in darkness becomes not just custom, but duty. You pull your cloak tighter, footsteps soft on frozen earth, and move toward the monastery rising on the hill, where bells will soon toll and voices will rise into the starry night. The road you follow winds steadily uphill, crunching beneath your feet as frost stiffens the ground. A chill wind carries the faint clang of iron on iron, though you quickly realize it is not the sound of a smith at work, but the toll of a bell echoing from stone walls above. You approach the monastery, its silhouette rising dark and angular against the moonlit sky. This is the world of monks, men who carve their lives into strict rhythms, where even sleep is divided, measured, and sacrificed for devotion. You step through the heavy wooden gates, their hinges groaning softly, and enter a courtyard that smells faintly of cold stone, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of beeswax. Torches sputter in iron brackets, casting thin circles of light, and the silence is broken only by footsteps shuffling toward the chapel. The monks are rising from their narrow cots for matins, the midnight prayers that anchor their nightly routine. You watch as their faces remain calm, resigned to the ritual, though their eyes still carry the blur of interrupted dreams. Mainstream history records that monastic schedules divided the night into periods of prayer, reading, and short rest. In Benedictine houses, bells summoned brothers to rise at set hours, no matter the season. Imagine being roused from deep slumber by a bell in the coldest months, stumbling into the chapel barefoot, breath steaming in the air. You feel sympathy, yet you also sense the quiet strength in such discipline. Sleep here is not an indulgence, but an offering, given up willingly in exchange for spiritual vigilance. Still, quirks abound. You hear of monks who secretly dozed during prayers, heads bobbing forward until a stern glance from the abbot jolted them back upright. Some even developed tricks, like pinching themselves or standing in drafty spots to stay awake. The image makes you smile. Holy men determined to fight off drowsiness like schoolchildren in a boring lecture. One chronicler admitted that monks sometimes nodded so vigorously their books slid from their laps with a thud. If you have ever fought sleep during a late meeting, you share more in common with these cloistered souls than you might think. The chapel itself is cool and hushed. You slip inside, feeling the uneven flagstones beneath your feet. Candles gutter in sconces, casting golden halos on stone arches. The air tastes of wax and smoke, thick yet strangely soothing. As monks begin to chant psalms in unison, the sound vibrates through the walls like a gentle hum, steady and hypnotic. The rhythm rises and falls, voices weaving together until you feel cocooned in sound. For a moment, you understand the appeal. Though sleep has been interrupted, something deeper is nourished in this collective murmur. Historians still argue whether the strict schedules preserved health or harmed it. Some claim the pattern fostered resilience, aligning monks with natural cycles of darkness and light. Others suspect chronic fatigue wore down their bodies, shortening lifespans. You picture a weary monk stifling a yawn while copying a manuscript, ink blotting the parchment, and wonder if divine devotion or sheer exhaustion guided his pen. Outside the chapel, you walk through cloisters where the cold air bites your skin. A fountain trickles softly in the courtyard, its surface reflecting starlight. You imagine monks drifting here between prayers, stretching stiff muscles, whispering brief conversations before silence is imposed again. The discipline feels heavy, but also oddly calming. Every action has its hour, every hour its duty. Even sleeplessness becomes part of the design. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind. Monastic communities preserved countless manuscripts precisely because of these nightly vigils. The hours spent awake often turned into opportunities for study and transcription. Without their efforts, much of ancient knowledge might have been lost. You smile faintly, realizing that while their sleep patterns may seem brutal, their sacrifices left an enduring gift. Your own late-night reading habits feel trivial compared to centuries of monks copying texts by candlelight. Still, humor has its place. Picture a monk half asleep at his desk, doodling in the margins instead of copying scripture. Indeed, surviving manuscripts show playful sketches, dragons, faces, and animals that suggest even holy men got bored in the dead of night. Perhaps one of those doodles was born during matins, when a drowsy brother could no longer resist letting his quill wander. You cannot help but grin at the thought, a tiny rebellion against fatigue and monotony. The night stretches, and eventually prayers conclude. Monks file back to their cells, their sandals scuffing softly, robes swaying like shadows. They return to their cots for a brief second sleep before rising again at dawn. You follow them, pausing to glance at the simplicity of their rooms. Narrow beds, wooden chests, bare walls. Comfort is stripped away so that discipline remains. You sit briefly on one cot, the straw mattress uneven, and imagine trying to drift back into slumber after chanting for an hour. Perhaps exhaustion conquers doubt, pulling you under before the next bell rings. As you rest there, you think of how different this world is from your own. Modern people fight to squeeze more hours of sleep into lives crowded by screens and obligations, while these monks deliberately shortened their rest to give space for prayer. Yet you also sense a similarity. Both worlds wrestle with balance, trying to reconcile body and spirit, routine and freedom. The monks answered by surrendering choice, binding themselves to a schedule that never wavered. Whether it made them holier or simply sleep-deprived remains a question. Historians still argue about that too. Your thoughts drift with the rhythm of bells. Midnight vigils, morning lauds, daytime work, evening prayers. The cycle repeats endlessly. Time feels circular here, not linear. Sleep is not a block, but a series of pauses woven into ritual. You begin to feel lulled by the idea itself, as though your own rest is being synchronized to their ancient routine. The sky outside pales slightly, stars fading as the horizon hints at dawn. You step back into the courtyard, watching monks prepare for another day of labor and devotion. Their eyes look heavy, yet their movements are steady, as though practice has dulled the edge of fatigue. Perhaps habit itself becomes a cushion, softening the impact of lost sleep. You walk slowly toward the gate, the stone walls towering behind you, and glance once more at the chapel. Its silence now feels heavier, a reservoir of prayers and snores alike. The monks will repeat the pattern tonight, and tomorrow, and the next night after that, until the rhythm is carved into their bones. With the faint toll of another bell echoing behind you, you step onto the path leading downhill. Ahead lies not monastic order, but village life again, where millers and farmers navigate their own sleep against labor and suspicion. You feel the world broadening, moving from cloister to community, where the simple act of measuring grain becomes entangled with trust, deceit, and restless nights. And so, with dawn brushing the horizon, you turn your gaze toward the next chapter of this journey. The miller's careful weighing, his nightly worries, and the gossip that drifts through the village like smoke. The path curves gently through fields damp with dew, and soon you hear it, the steady thump of a millstone turning, grinding grain into flour. The sound is deep, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing in the night air. You arrive at a low timber building, its wheel creaking as water rushes past, and step inside. The scent of ground grain, dusty, dry, with a faint sweetness, fills your nose instantly. Here, the miller works, weighed down not only by bags of wheat, but by suspicion. You watch him carefully measure out grain, scoop by scoop, eyes narrowed. He pours from sack to scale, then back again, checking weights twice. This is no mere habit of precision. It is survival. In medieval villages, millers occupied an uneasy place. Everyone depended on them, yet few trusted them. Mainstream history notes that grain tolls, the small percentage kept by the miller as payment, were a constant source of friction. Accusations of theft hovered over them like gnats over the river. To protect himself, the miller measures publicly, demonstrating honesty, even if muttered voices in the background suggest otherwise. You lean closer, hearing one woman whisper that millers always skim a little extra, while another defends him, saying his scales are fair. The gossip drifts like smoke, filling the space as tangibly as flour dust. The poor miller seems trapped, damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. You imagine his weary sigh when, even after a long day's labor, he must repeat each measurement twice to stave off rumor. A quirky tidbit reaches your ear. Some villages believed millers possessed secret tricks for cheating the scales, such as hollowed scoops or concealed weights. One tale claims a particularly crafty miller trained his cat to jostle the scale at opportune moments. Whether true or not, you can't help chuckling at the picture of a feline accomplice swiping at balances with suspicious timing. It seems that where flour and bread are involved, suspicion grows like weeds. Historians still argue whether millers truly deserved their reputation or whether they were simply victims of envy. After all, they controlled a vital resource. Bread was life itself. Anyone with such power would inevitably attract resentment. Perhaps some cheated. Perhaps others were scrupulous. The truth may be as mixed as the flour spilling from sacks onto the dusty floor. You watch the miller continue his routine. He checks each sack, scribbles notes, and wipes his brow with a flour-stained sleeve. His hands are rough, his eyes cautious, his back bent from years of lifting. He is no villain, just a man caught in the grinding cycle of necessity and suspicion. You can almost feel the weight of that double life, respected for skill, distrusted for opportunity. The mill itself hums steadily, the grindstone turning with rhythmic inevitability. You let the sound wash over you like white noise. It is oddly calming, almost hypnotic, a medieval lullaby. Perhaps villagers who lived near mills drifted to sleep each night with that heavy thrum in their ears, unaware that future centuries would call it ambient sound. You think to yourself, someone could have recorded this and sold it as a sleep aid. 10 hours of medieval grain grinding, no ads. Outside, the village stirs faintly. The night is not silent here. You hear distant voices, laughter from a tavern, and a dog barking at shadows. Yet inside the mill, the steady grind sets its own pace, timeless and relentless. You picture the miller's wife tending a small lamp, yawning as she waits, while her husband insists on weighing the final sacks again. No one will say he cheated. Not tonight. Not if he can help it. The atmosphere thickens with flour dust, settling on your hair and eyelashes. You blink slowly, feeling the grit, imagining how exhausting it must be to breathe this every day. Yet it is the price of survival. Bread must be made, and flour must be ground. You realize that while priests prayed and nobles reclined, millers bore the burden of feeding everyone. That responsibility alone explains both their power and their isolation. Humor still sneaks into the scene. You picture a villager sighing that his bread seems lighter this week, then accusing the miller of theft, only to discover his own child has been sneaking crusts at night. Or perhaps you imagine the miller's cat, still maligned centuries later, rolling its eyes at being blamed for missing ounces. Life, you realize, is rarely as sinister as gossip insists. The night wears on, the wheel keeps turning, and you begin to see why millers measured twice. It was not just about fairness, but about peace of mind. Each second weighing was a defense against suspicion, a small ritual to ward off whispers. In a world where reputation mattered as much as bread itself, such caution was essential. Historians still argue whether these nightly checks were common practice or rare precautions. But the evidence of mistrust is undeniable. You glance at the scales, at the careful balance of weight and counterweight, and see more than flour. You see the fragile balance of trust itself. The miller finally exhales, satisfied that his records will hold up under scrutiny. He wipes his hands, stretches his aching shoulders, and steps outside into the chill. You follow him, hearing the distant chatter of villagers still awake between their first and second sleeps. The gossip continues, flowing as steadily as the river powering his wheel. You realize that while sleep divides the night for the villagers, Worry divides it for the miller. You take one last look at the mill, its wheel glistening in moonlight, its steady thrum fading behind you. The path ahead leads to another kind of rest. Not the worried calculations of a miller, but the rough, itchy comfort of straw beds where peasants seek warmth from labor's exhaustion. The night grows colder, the stars sharper, and you find yourself drawn toward the cottages where straw mattresses await, lumpy yet cherished. You step away from the mill, the flour dust still clinging to your clothes, and prepare to lie down where the common folk rest, scratching at fleas and sighing into second sleep. The mill fades behind you, its wheel turning slowly in the moonlight, and you wander down a dirt path toward the cluster of cottages that shape the heart of the medieval village. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, though most fires have burned down to embers. The smell of damp earth, old straw, and wood smoke drifts on the air. You duck beneath a low doorway and step into the living space of a peasant family, where the day's toil has finally given way to rest. Here you learn what it feels like to lie down on the simplest of beds, straw mattresses. The room is dim, lit by the faint orange glow of a dying hearth. The mattress lies in the corner, nothing more than a coarse sack stuffed with straw, lumpy and uneven. You crouch down and press your hand into it. The stalks crunch beneath your fingers, prickly against your skin. The mattress smells faintly of dry grass, dust, and something more organic you choose not to identify. Yet for a family who has spent the day bent over fields, this is a comfort worth cherishing. Mainstream history notes that straw mattresses were standard for peasants throughout the Middle Ages. Wealthier families might mix in feathers or wool, but for most people, straw was affordable and replaceable. You imagine the yearly ritual of emptying and refilling the mattress, dragging in fresh straw after harvest. For a short time, the bed might feel crisp and fragrant, almost like lying in a summer meadow. But soon the straw would break down, flatten, and attract unwelcome companions. Here lies the quirky tidbit. Beds were often alive. Fleas, lice, and other pests nested in the straw, biting through the night. One record even suggests that some peasants scattered aromatic herbs among the stalks to mask the smell and perhaps discourage insects. You picture yourself lying down, scratching, muttering that at least the lavender helps you pretend the fleas are just small massage therapists. Humor is perhaps the only defense against such nightly company. Historians still argue whether peasants viewed these beds as uncomfortable burdens or simply accepted them without complaint. Surviving accounts suggest that expectations were different. A lumpy mattress was better than the hard floor, and the idea of a perfectly smooth surface had not yet entered imagination. Comfort was relative, and survival mattered more. You realize how easily your own standards would collapse if you had spent 12 hours threshing grain in the cold. That uneven straw sack might feel like paradise. You stretch out on the bed, closing your eyes. The straw rustles beneath you, sharp edges pressing into your side. You shift, seeking a soft spot, only to find a different lump waiting. Yet the warmth of bodies gathered together makes up for much. Families often shared beds, with children nestled between parents, or siblings piled side by side. Privacy was rare, but companionship was constant. You feel the heat of others breathing around you, the muffled cough of a grandparent, the sigh of a child. The bed becomes less about personal comfort and more about communal survival. The air inside the cottage is close, heavy with smoke and sweat. You hear the faint scurrying of a mouse in the corner, the crackle of embers as they fade. Outside, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Within, the rhythm of sleep takes over. Slow breathing, occasional snoring, the restless shifting of limbs. You imagine this chorus repeating across countless cottages, a whole village bound by the same sounds. Humor surfaces again. You picture someone waking in the night to find a chicken has hopped onto the mattress, pecking curiously at straw. Or perhaps you imagine a father swatting irritably at a flea, muttering that even the pests must pay rent if they insist on sharing the bed. These small moments lighten what might otherwise seem grim. Even in discomfort, people found ways to laugh. You roll slightly, feeling the mattress collapse beneath your hip. The straw shifts, whispering like dry leaves. It is not luxurious, yet it holds a rustic charm. Perhaps the familiarity itself was soothing. After a day of endless toil, the body demanded rest, and even the scratchiest mattress could provide it. You wonder if exhaustion, more than comfort, was the true sleep aid of the Middle Ages. Mainstream accounts remind you that wealthier households sometimes upgraded, laying mattresses of feathers or down upon wooden frames. Yet even then, servants often slept on straw in corners. The contrast between classes showed clearly in bedding. What you find prickly and rough might have been the lifelong norm for most. Only later, with the spread of trade and luxury goods, would comfort become more widely accessible. Historians still argue whether peasants dreamed differently, their nights fragmented by discomfort. Did fleas wake them so often that their sleep resembled the segmented patterns of monastics? Or did sheer exhaustion override interruption? Records are silent, but you can imagine a weary farmer collapsing onto straw, too drained to notice the itching. Sometimes, fatigue itself is the most powerful sedative. The night deepens. You picture the family shifting under rough wool blankets, their breaths forming faint mist in the cold air. The mattress creaks softly as they move. One child mumbles in a dream, another kicks in protest. Parents pull them close again, murmuring reassurance. You feel the warmth, the intimacy of lives shared so closely. While the mattress may scratch and sag, it binds the family together in nightly ritual. Your own eyelids grow heavy. The steady crackle of cooling embers, the rhythm of slow breathing, and the rustle of straw weave a sleepy lullaby. You realize how these small, humble beds supported not just bodies, but entire ways of life. Without them, peasants could not rise again to work the fields, to grind grain, to keep the village alive. The straw mattress, unimpressive though it seems, was a cornerstone of survival. As your mind drifts, you remember the fleas and smile faintly. Perhaps they, too, were part of the ecosystem, unwanted but inevitable. A medieval farmer might shrug and say, "Better bitten and warm than frozen and alone." Comfort, after all, is relative. The fire sighs one last time, sending up a brief flare before settling into coals. The family slips deeper into second sleep, their bodies pressed together on the uneven bed. You rise quietly, stepping over the threshold into the night. The cold air bites your cheeks, sharp and clear after the closeness of the cottage. Behind you, the straw mattress cradles its sleepers, lumps, fleas, and all. Ahead lies a different kind of bed, one curtained in velvet, where aristocrats seek privacy and warmth. Shutting out the world with layers of fabric, you take a deep breath, watching your breath cloud in the air, and follow the path toward the manor house, glowing faintly on the hill. The narrow lane winds upward toward the manor, where light glows faintly behind shuttered windows. You tread softly, leaving behind the straw-stuffed beds of the village for chambers, where wealth reshapes the very idea of sleep. The air is sharper here, tinged with pine from the nearby forest, and the faint perfume of herbs burning in wall sconces. As you cross the threshold, you are greeted by stone walls lined with tapestries, their colors muted by candlelight. The room you enter is dominated by a bed, not a humble sack on the floor, but a towering structure draped in fabric. This is the curtained bed of the aristocracy, both refuge and stage. You pause to take it in. The frame rises like a canopy, carved with vines and heraldic beasts. Heavy velvet curtains hang down, ready to be drawn shut against drafts, insects, and prying eyes. To a noble, sleep is not simply unconsciousness, but a carefully curated event. Mainstream history tells you that these beds functioned as more than furniture. They were symbols of wealth, designed to display status as much as to provide rest. Guests might even be entertained from within, the curtains drawn back like a theater unveiling its scene. You imagine yourself reclining on silk sheets, trying to appear dignified, even while fighting a yawn. The fabric itself becomes part of the ritual. Closing the curtains creates privacy, a rare commodity in large households filled with servants. The flick of velvet rings muffles sound, traps warmth, and seals away a bubble of intimacy. In a drafty castle where cold air snakes under doors and through cracks in stone, this cocoon must have felt like sanctuary. You slide a hand along the thick curtain, feeling its weight, marveling that sleep here could be both warmer and more exclusive than anywhere outside. A quirky tidbit drifts into your ear. Some beds were so large and enclosed that servants were expected to sleep at their master's feet inside the curtains. Privacy, it seems, was relative. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, stretching luxuriously, only to bump into your attendant's elbow. Comfort and hierarchy tangled awkwardly under the same roof. And yet, this arrangement persisted, because even in intimacy, nobles wanted service close at hand. Historians still argue whether these curtained beds genuinely improved health or whether they trapped stale air and invited illness. Some accounts praised the warmth and protection, while others warned that too much enclosure stifled the body. You can almost hear the medieval physician wagging a finger, muttering that damp velvet breeds melancholy. Still, the image of nobles retreating into their velvet fortresses lingers, a striking contrast to peasants scratching through straw. You climb onto the bed itself, sinking into feather mattresses that swallow you whole. The sensation is strange, at once comforting and disorienting. Your body sinks deep, unlike the sharp crunch of straw. The fabric smells faintly of lavender, a luxury stuffed among the feathers to ward off pests. For a moment, you imagine yourself as a baron, wrapping silk sheets close, sighing with satisfaction as you draw the curtains shut. Outside, servants whisper and scurry, but within the enclosure, the world falls away. Yet comfort carries irony. Nobles often shared these beds, not just with spouses, but with children, attendants, or even favored guests. In a world where firewood was scarce, warmth came from shared bodies. The idea of sleeping alone, cocooned in silence, was rare. You smile faintly at the contradiction. A bed built to show off wealth still hosted a jumble of elbows, knees, and snores. The atmosphere in the chamber deepens as night advances. The fire in the hearth crackles softly. Shadows sway across tapestries, and outside the high windows, you glimpse stars wheeling above the manor roof. Yet inside the curtains, darkness thickens into velvet silence. You imagine the noble drifting to sleep, mind buzzing with land disputes, political intrigues, and dinner's excess of venison. Perhaps even here, on silk pillows, rest is elusive. You cannot resist a touch of humor. Picture a lord snoring thunderously, his velvet curtains shaking with each exhale, while servants outside politely pretend not to hear. Or imagine a noblewoman's frustration as her carefully perfumed bed is invaded by her husband's muddy hunting boots. Aristocratic life might seem elegant, but even here, nightly reality broke through. Mainstream accounts remind you that bedchambers were often public spaces. Lords held audiences from bed, dictating orders while propped on pillows. Curtains offered the illusion of privacy, but power required visibility. Imagine being summoned to report your harvest while your lord lounges, half awake, hair tousled, his velvet cocoon serving as both throne and mattress. Sleep and authority blurred until one became part of the other. Historians still argue whether this blend of public and private eroded intimacy, or whether it simply reflected a different understanding of boundaries. Today you may guard your bedroom as sacred space, but for the medieval aristocrat, the bed was as much a workplace as a resting place. Perhaps only in the still hours, curtains fully drawn, did they claim true solitude. You breathe in the heavy perfume of herbs, feeling warmth soak into your limbs. The feather mattress cradles you, and for a moment you nearly forget the fleas of the village straw beds. Yet you realize both peasant and noble sought the same thing: relief from fatigue, warmth in the cold, safety in the dark. The tools differed, the textures varied, but the yearning was shared. The chamber grows quieter, the noble family settles into their fortress of fabric, and the castle outside hums faintly with activity. Guards march along walls, dogs bark at distant shadows, and somewhere below, servants curl on their own straw pallets. The division between velvet and straw remains stark, yet all drift into sleep together, bound by the same moonlight. You rise softly, brushing velvet dust from your hands, and step back into the corridor. The cold air bites after the warmth of the curtained bed, reminding you that luxury is fragile. One open window, one drafty crack, and even velvet cannot hold back the winter night. As you walk away, the heavy curtains close silently behind you, sealing in warmth and whispers. Ahead lies a new kind of night, not the ordered rituals of monks, or the suspicions of millers, or the contrasting beds of peasants and nobles, but the sounds that haunt medieval darkness. Noises in the night, both natural and unsettling, shaped sleep just as much as fabric or straw. You follow the corridor toward an open window, where the hoot of an owl echoes across the courtyard. The air shifts, carrying with it the promise of creaks, bells, and whispers waiting in the dark. The castle corridor fades into shadow, and you lean closer to the open window where the night spills in. It is not silence that greets you, but a symphony of noises. The medieval night is restless, alive with sounds both natural and man-made, each one shaping the fragile boundary between waking and sleep. You step outside into the courtyard and pause, listening carefully. First comes the hoot of an owl from the forest edge, a low and haunting call that cuts through the stillness. It echoes between stone walls, eerie and prolonged. To modern ears, it might sound quaint, but for many in the Middle Ages, owls were omens. Mainstream history reminds you that their cries were often linked with death or misfortune. You picture a villager lying awake in his straw bed, stiff with unease, wondering whose passing the owl might herald. His sleep is not broken by fleas alone, but by the weight of superstition pressing against his ears. You wander further, hearing the creak of beams inside houses. Wood shifts as it cools, timber settling into place with sudden pops. Families stir uneasily, half convinced that spirits tread across their roofs. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some people placed iron nails above their doors, convinced the sound of settling wood meant fairies or demons sought entry. Imagine explaining to a medieval friend that it was only thermal expansion. They would probably nod politely, then hammer in another nail just to be safe. The air grows colder, and a thin mist curls over the fields. From afar, you hear the splash of water, a wheel turning, perhaps the mill still grinding late into the night. You imagine the miller inside, double-checking his scales again, while the steady thrum carries outward like an unintentional lullaby. Yet the villagers nearby might not find it soothing. Some complain that such mechanical rumblings disrupt their rest. Historians still argue whether industrial sounds like mills were embraced as background or cursed as intrusion. Either way, the village night is far from silent. Closer at hand, you hear footsteps. Guards on patrol stamp heavily, armor clinking as they circle the castle walls. Their duty is to ensure peace, but their noise becomes another thread in the restless fabric of night. You imagine a noblewoman behind velvet curtains, muttering irritably that the guards walk too loudly. Sleep, you realize, has always battled with security. Too much safety can sound like racket. From the chapel comes the faint toll of a bell. Its tone drifts solemnly across the courtyard, marking hours, even while most would prefer not to know the time. Bells punctuate the medieval night, calling monks to prayer, reminding villagers of curfews, warning of fire or flood. For someone dozing lightly, the sound might pierce dreams like a needle. You picture a farmer groaning, turning over, muttering that even God's clock is too persistent. The noises of nature join in. Dogs bark intermittently, chasing invisible threats. Roosters sometimes crow long before dawn, confused by moonlight or lamps. You hear the faint buzz of insects by the river, the rustle of rodents in storehouses. Sleep in the Middle Ages was porous, riddled with interruptions from creatures that ignored human schedules. Humor slips in when you imagine a rooster enthusiastically announcing dawn at 2 a.m, only for the farmer to throw a boot in frustration. Medieval alarm clocks, it seems, were just as unreliable as modern ones. Inside homes, night noises multiply. A child whimpers in a dream. A man coughs. A woman stirs the fire. Straw rustles as bodies shift, and in cramped cottages, every movement carries across the room. Privacy is minimal. Each sigh, each snore, becomes part of the communal soundtrack. You imagine a family joking about who snores loudest, though in truth the humor may fade quickly when exhaustion grows. You drift further into the village, pausing near a tavern. Even at midnight, muffled laughter and the clink of mugs seep through its shutters. Sleep is delayed for those who find solace in ale and company. But the merriment spreads outward, echoing into alleys where weary laborers toss and turn, wishing the drinkers would quiet down. Historians still argue whether medieval communities tolerated such noise as inevitable or scolded it as disorderly. Records suggest both. Fines for late-night rowdiness, yet plenty of stories of drunken revelers stumbling home regardless. The wind rises, rattling shutters and whistling through cracks. You feel a draft slip down your collar, sharp enough to make you shiver. Imagine lying on a straw bed, with no curtains to block the gusts. Every creak of wood, every sigh of wind, every clatter of a loose latch might snap you briefly awake. Sleep, then, is not the deep plunge you crave, but a series of shallow dips, interrupted by sound. Perhaps this is why segmented sleep felt natural. People expected to be woken by noise. Amid these disturbances, You sense how fragile the night truly was. Unlike modern houses sealed with double glazing, medieval dwellings invited sound inside. Silence was rare, perhaps even unnatural. People learned to live with it, weaving noise into their understanding of night. What frightened one person might soothe another. The same owl that signaled death to a farmer might simply reassure a shepherd that his flock was being watched by nature itself. You wander back toward the castle, listening as all these noises blend into a single tapestry. The rhythm of the mill, the hoot of an owl, the cough of a child, the clang of a guard's step, all overlap into a strangely hypnotic pattern. You realize that medieval sleepers were not cushioned by silence, but rocked by sound. Their nights were filled with creaks, calls, and clangs, shaping dreams and worries alike. Humor lingers even here. You picture someone waking to a drip of water on their forehead, convinced of supernatural intrusion, only to discover a leaky roof. Or perhaps you imagine a dog barking relentlessly, villagers cursing, until morning reveals the threat was nothing more than a hedgehog. These moments show that fear and laughter often shared the same bed. The night grows heavier, mist thickens, muffling some sounds while amplifying others. The bell tolls once more, long and low, blending with the owl's cry. You feel yourself lulled by this uneven orchestra, soothed not despite the noise, but because of it. Perhaps true silence is too foreign, too unsettling. A restless night can still be a comforting one, as long as its noises are familiar. You step away from the courtyard, following a dirt road that leads out of the village. The noises fade gradually, replaced by the softer sounds of travelers stirring. Pilgrims, wrapped in cloaks, shift on church floors, dreaming of distant relics and holy places. Ahead, you sense a new chapter of sleep history waiting. The long, weary slumber of those who wander the road for faith, resting wherever they can. The road stretches long and uneven, stones jutting up through dirt, worn smooth by countless feet. You walk quietly along it, the mist clinging to your cloak, until you see a faint glow ahead. A church rises at the edge of a small town, its spire pointing like a finger toward the sky. The doors are open, and inside, pilgrims lie sprawled across the cold flagstones, wrapped in rough cloaks, their heads resting on saddlebags. This is where you find sleep on the road. Not in feathered beds or straw mattresses, but in whatever patch of floor the church allows. You step inside, and the air is thick with wax and damp stone. Candles gutter near the altar, illuminating rows of weary travelers collapsed in uneven heaps. Some whisper prayers before surrendering to sleep, while others mumble in dreams, their voices echoing faintly in the cavernous space. The scent is a mixture of sweat, leather, unwashed feet, and beeswax. It is not pleasant, but it is the smell of movement, of faith, of endurance. Pilgrimage is not only about reaching holy relics, it is about surviving the long nights in between. Mainstream history records that medieval pilgrims often slept in churches or hospices provided by monasteries. They rarely traveled alone. Crowds of men, women, and children filled these makeshift dormitories. Privacy was non-existent, comfort scarce, but the spiritual journey outweighed such concerns. You imagine yourself lying down among them, clutching your cloak tightly, using your shoes as a pillow. The stone beneath you is cold, but exhaustion makes even this bearable. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some places, pilgrims believed that sleeping close to relics could heal sickness or grant visions. They would press as near as possible to a saint's shrine, hoping that dreams beside holy remains would be blessed. You picture someone inching closer in the night, only to be nudged back by another equally determined seeker. The idea that divine power might leak into dreams feels both desperate and endearing, a mingling of faith and fatigue. Historians still argue whether such practices were more spiritual than practical. Was sleeping in churches primarily about devotion, or was it simply the safest option for travelers who could not afford inns? Evidence suggests both, but the truth is blurred. Perhaps the pilgrims themselves didn't distinguish between the two. In the middle of a long road, where thieves lurk and storms strike, the church floor offered both divine presence and a locked door. That alone could lull weary bodies into sleep. You walk softly between rows of slumbering figures. A man snores loudly, his sound bouncing off the stone arches. A child shifts restlessly, her small hand clutching a wooden cross. A woman mutters fragments of prayer even as her eyes flutter shut. The rhythm of their breathing becomes the music of the church, a rough lullaby carried on echoes. You realize that for them, sleep is part of the pilgrimage, a necessary ritual between walking and worship. Yet sleep on the road is never easy. You notice the constant interruptions, a cough here, a shuffle there, the creak of the door as another group stumbles in. The stone floor leaches warmth quickly, forcing people to wake, roll over, and huddle closer together. Humorous moments arise too. You imagine two strangers shifting in the night, their cloaks tangling, one grumbling that the other has stolen all the blanket, when in fact neither has much to begin with. Even in discomfort, human comedy persists. Outside the church, the road stretches endlessly. Inns exist, but they are often too costly for the poor. A pilgrim may find himself sleeping under hedges, in barns, or along roadside shrines. You feel the roughness of grass beneath your palms, hear the rustle of small animals in the dark, and sense the chill of dew settling onto your cloak. Compared to a peasant's straw mattress or a noble's curtained bed, this sleep feels exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely free. The sky becomes your ceiling, stars your companions. Mainstream accounts remind you that pilgrimage was as much social as spiritual. Groups formed bonds on the road, and these bonds shaped their nights. People shared food, stories, and space, enduring the lack of comfort together. A fire might be built by the roadside, pilgrims huddling close, telling tales of saints until exhaustion silenced them. You smile faintly, recognizing the timelessness of campfire camaraderie. Even now, camping under open sky carries the same mixture of hardship and wonder. You hear the shuffle of feet nearby. A group of latecomers enters the church, their cloaks dripping from rain. They unroll bundles of straw, spreading them thinly on the floor as makeshift bedding. You crouch beside them, noticing how even a thin barrier between body and stone makes a difference. They sigh with relief, eyes closing almost instantly. Perhaps comfort is always measured in contrast. Stone to straw, straw to feathers, feathers to silk. Each step feels like luxury compared to what came before. A quirky scene plays in your mind. Pilgrims rising in the middle of the night to compare dreams, convinced their visions hold meaning. One claims he saw a saint offering bread. Another insists he dreamt of a clear river leading to heaven. They whisper excitedly, half believing, half hoping. Sleep becomes not only recovery, but also revelation. You chuckle softly at the thought of someone dreaming only of cheese, and another pilgrim interpreting it as a promise of divine abundance. Historians still argue whether such dreams were personal experiences or communal stories shaped by expectation. Did pilgrims truly believe their dreams carried divine messages? Or did they simply want to believe? The question lingers, unanswered, like so many mysteries of sleep. What is clear is that for travelers weary from the road, dreams gave hope. Even if the vision was nonsense, the comfort it offered could carry them another mile. The night deepens. The candles gutter lower, their smoke curling upward. The sound of snores, coughs, and whispers melds into a heavy silence. You sit among the pilgrims, feeling the hardness of stone beneath you, the weight of centuries pressing down. Pilgrimage is movement, yet in these hours it becomes stillness, a surrender to the body's demand for rest. Outside, the road waits. Ahead lie more miles, more hardships, more holy shrines. For now, though, the pilgrims sleep, their dreams mingling with the scent of wax and damp air. You rise quietly, stepping back through the doors. The night outside feels wider, emptier without the press of bodies, yet you carry with you the rhythm of their sleep, the knowledge that the road is not just walked, but slept upon, one weary night at a time. You follow the path onward, past hedges dripping with dew, past barns where travelers huddle among livestock for warmth. Soon, you hear voices of physicians and healers, offering their advice on how to sleep well, how to keep the body balanced through night and day. You turn your steps toward them, ready to hear what wisdom, or absurdity, they prescribe for a restless age. You follow the road away from the pilgrim's church, and soon you find yourself beneath the awning of a small house, where the smell of herbs and old parchment lingers in the air. Inside, a physician in a long robe is lecturing to a group of weary townsfolk about the right way to sleep. His tone is solemn, though you sense that half of his advice is little more than recycled tradition, spiced with a few wild guesses. Welcome to the world of medieval and early medical sleep advice, a blend of practical care, superstition, and occasional comedy. The physician begins with the obvious: avoid heavy suppers. Mainstream history confirms that doctors across centuries warned against eating too much late in the evening, insisting that food weighed on the stomach and poisoned the dreams. You watch as the physician scolds a baker for nibbling on cheese before bed, claiming it would give him nightmares. You almost laugh, thinking of your own midnight snacks, guilty but delicious, and wonder if perhaps you too are guilty of poisoning your sleep. A quirky tidbit soon surfaces. Some manuals advised against sleeping on the left side of the body, insisting that this posture squashed the heart and disrupted digestion. Instead, one was told to start lying on the right, then roll gradually to the back. You imagine a medieval man carefully orchestrating his bedtime like a choreographed dance routine, rolling on cue, as though an invisible director shouted, "Now turn!" The thought alone makes you smile, yet it reveals how seriously people took these rituals. Historians still argue whether such recommendations had any genuine benefit, or whether they were simply part of a broader obsession with balancing the humors. Sleep, in this medical philosophy, was not only about rest, but about ensuring that blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile flowed correctly. If one humor dominated, sleep would falter, and illness might follow. You sigh gently at the idea of your body treated as a soup pot, with the night acting as the slow simmer. You glance around the physician's chamber. Jars of herbs line the shelves, dried sage and rosemary, dangling from rafters. The physician prescribes chamomile tea for restlessness, lavender sachets for sweet dreams, and cautions against stale air. He insists windows must be opened for proper ventilation, though in winter this advice sounds less like comfort and more like punishment. You imagine shivering peasants cursing under their breath while dutifully cracking the shutters. A woman nearby raises her hand timidly, asking about nightmares. The physician responds gravely, suggesting that they may be caused by indigestion or by demons slipping into the body during sleep. To prevent this, one might place iron under the pillow or recite certain prayers before lying down. You picture the mixture of faith and medicine blending awkwardly. Garlic cloves to ward off spirits, whispered psalms to calm the mind, and a doctor insisting on lighter dinners. The medieval night was never short of advice. Humor drifts in as you picture the contradictions. One physician might advise drinking warm wine to encourage sleep, while another condemns it as poison for the liver. One might recommend stretching before bed, while another insists stillness preserves the humors. If you tried to follow them all, you would spend more time worrying than resting. Perhaps insomnia itself was born from too many instructions. You lean closer to a parchment manuscript spread on the table. In careful script, you see the recommendations for bedding: wool for warmth, linen for cleanliness, straw only if necessary. Yet you know that for most peasants, straw was not a choice but a reality. Doctors could prescribe comfort, but only the wealthy could afford it. Advice, then, was often less about practicality and more about aspiration. You chuckle softly, realizing that even medieval health tips had an element of privilege. The physician continues, warning against excess sleep. Too much, he claims, leads to laziness, dampens the spirit, and clogs the body's functions. Too little, however, risks madness and early death. You recognize the eternal struggle. Humanity has never quite agreed on the correct number of hours. Historians still argue whether medieval people aimed for 6, 7, or 8 hours in total, though segmented sleep complicates the measure. You imagine someone nodding sagely at the physician, then promptly falling asleep mid-lecture. Night settles heavier outside. You hear the faint drip of water, the creak of rafters, the whisper of wind under the door. Within the chamber, townsfolk shuffle, some taking notes, others stifling yawns. You can almost sense their thought. Advice is fine, but sleep will come when it chooses. Perhaps the best remedy is not herb or posture, but simply exhaustion. After a day in fields or workshops, the body claims its due. Still, these rituals offered comfort. Even if the herbs did little, the act of preparation soothed. Laying lavender on the pillow, opening the window just slightly, repeating a prayer. These were signals to the body, gentle invitations to let go. You realize that not much has changed. Today, you may scroll a phone, dim lights, or set alarms. Each age invents its own rituals to coax sleep. You rise, leaving the physician to his earnest prescriptions, and step into the night once more. The stars are sharp against the darkness, the air crisp and cool. Behind you, the murmur of advice continues. But ahead lies a world where scholars and thinkers take sleep beyond medicine, debating its role in character and somaigati itself. The Renaissance awaits, with arguments as fiery as any tavern brawl, except waged with quills and ink. As you walk, you cannot help smiling at the echoes. No matter the century, people fret about how to sleep, when to sleep, and what it means. Perhaps the true lesson is that sleep has always been both mystery and necessity, endlessly analyzed, never fully understood. With that thought, you continue onward, ready to listen to the debates of Renaissance minds who cannot help but argue and even tabun over their dreams. You step softly into the glow of another era. The rough cobblestones give way to smoother streets, the cottages replaced by brick houses and courtyards filled with chatter. The Renaissance has arrived, and with it a new wave of curiosity about everything, including sleep. The night no longer belongs solely to superstition or strict monastic rules. It becomes a subject for scholars, physicians, and philosophers who argue with the same passion they might reserve for astronomy or art. You enter a study where candles burn low in brass holders, their wax dripping onto tables crowded with books. Scholars lean over manuscripts, quills scratching furiously, voices rising in debate. You slip into a chair at the edge of the room and listen. Sleep, they declare, is not just rest, but a mirror of the soul. One insists that too much of it dulls the mind. Another counters that dreams reveal hidden genius. The arguments echo like a chorus of owls in the night. Mainstream history reminds you that Renaissance thinkers inherited the ancient theories of Aristotle and Galen. They still believed in humors, still worried about balance, but they added new layers of interpretation. Sleep became a moral issue as much as a medical one. Too little suggested ambition. Too much hinted at sloth. You picture a wealthy merchant's son being scolded for sleeping past sunrise, warned that slumber would rot his character. In this world, the hour you woke became a statement about who you were. A quirky tidbit emerges from one scholar's notes. He claims that men of exceptional genius needed less sleep because their minds were too active to rest. Others argue the opposite, that deep, prolonged sleep was a sign of divine inspiration. Imagine lying in bed until noon and defending yourself by declaring, "I am communing with the muses." You smile at the thought, though you suspect your employer would remain unconvinced. Historians still argue whether these Renaissance debates were taken seriously by ordinary people or confined to scholarly circles. Did villagers care whether their dreams reflected genius, or did they simply collapse into sleep after long days of work? Evidence suggests both worlds coexisted. While scholars scribbled about philosophy, peasants scratched at straw mattresses and nobles pulled velvet curtains. Yet the ripple of ideas spread, shaping how people understood their nightly rest. You glance around the study. Books lie open to pages describing dream interpretation, guides linking images to moral lessons. Dream of climbing a ladder? It means success. Dream of falling? It signals moral failure. You can almost hear the laughter of skeptics who found such claims absurd, yet others clung to them, desperate for meaning. Dreams became little theaters, where conscience and fate performed nightly plays. The air grows thick with ink and smoke as debates roll on. One scholar insists that sleep refreshes memory. Another argues it erases knowledge. A third interrupts, declaring that sleep is dangerous because it invites demonic influence. The arguments swirl until they sound like the very dreams they attempt to decode. Chaotic, vivid, and impossible to settle. You lean back, amused at the parallels. Even now, debates about sleep continue. How many hours are enough? Is napping beneficial or lazy? The Renaissance reminds you that humanity has always argued over the same questions, only dressed in different language. Perhaps the true continuity is not the answers, but the endless need to ask. Outside the study, the city hums with its own version of night. Bells toll curfew, vendors close stalls, and taverns spill laughter into the streets. In some homes, people sleep early, exhausted by labor. In others, candles burn late as scholars and artists chase inspiration. The Renaissance night is stretched and reshaped, no longer bound by strict medieval rhythms. Sleep is squeezed between ambition and devotion, caught in the tension of a world expanding. You wander through narrow alleys where students argue in Latin, their voices carrying over stone walls. You hear snippets claims that too much sleep makes the flesh soft, or that sleepless nights sharpen the mind. You imagine them stumbling home at dawn, convinced they are geniuses, when in truth they are simply groggy. Humor slips in again. Perhaps the Renaissance gave us great art, but it also gave us centuries of self-important yawning. Mainstream accounts highlight figures like Leonardo da Vinci, rumored to practice polyphasic sleep, napping briefly throughout the day instead of surrendering to long nights. Whether true or exaggerated, such tales capture the fascination with bending sleep to human will. You picture Leonardo sketching machines at midnight, dozing for 20 minutes, then leaping up to paint again. The story may be embellished, but it reveals the period's restless drive to turn even sleep into experiment. Historians still argue whether such patterns were sustainable or simply myths retold by admirers. Could anyone truly thrive on scattered naps? Perhaps Leonardo did, or perhaps he simply worked too much and excused his exhaustion with clever words. Either way, the legend endures, shaping how people imagine the link between genius and sleeplessness. You pause in a courtyard where the night air is cool, carrying the scent of orange blossoms from nearby gardens. Above you, windows glow faintly as scholars and merchants alike wrestle with sleep. Some resist it, some embrace it, some analyze it endlessly. The Renaissance does not settle the mystery. It magnifies it, layering moral judgment and intellectual ambition atop the simple act of lying down. Humor rises once more. Imagine a scholar's wife scolding him for staying up too late, only for him to reply loftily, "My love, I am investigating the soul." Or a young apprentice falling asleep in church, later claiming it was an experiment in dream prophecy. The justifications must have been as inventive as the arguments themselves. The night grows deeper, and the debates fade into murmurs. Candles burn low, pages flutter closed, and scholars finally surrender to the same sleep they spent hours dissecting. You realize that despite their arguments, they too must rest, must dream, must wake. In this, at least, humanity remains united. You step softly out of the study, leaving behind the quills and ink. Ahead lies a new rhythm of night, not shaped by philosophy alone, but by the clanging of machinery, the blare of factory whistles, the relentless pull of industrial time. Sleep will soon face a new enemy, the alarm clock, and the world's insistence on waking at once. You take one last look at the Renaissance city, its towers rising against a starry sky, then turn toward the rumble of distant bells. The industrial age is calling, and with it, the sound of mornings no one can ignore. The stone alleys of the Renaissance city fade behind you, and you step into a world of smoke and steel. The air grows heavy with the sharp scent of coal, the hiss of steam, and the constant clang of iron against iron. This is the industrial age, and here, sleep itself is no longer measured by sun and stars, but by the factory bell. You pause at the entrance of a textile mill, its tall brick chimneys pumping black clouds into the night. Inside, the hum of machines continues, relentless, even after darkness falls. For centuries, night was segmented, flexible, shaped by candles and seasons. Now, with the rise of industry, a new rhythm emerges. Mainstream history records how bells and whistles summoned workers before dawn and released them at dusk, often after 12 or 14 hours of labor. Sleep was squeezed to the margins, compressed by schedules that cared little for human needs. You imagine a weary man stumbling home, collapsing onto his straw mattress with no thought for supper, only desperate for a few hours before the whistle shrieked again. The whistle itself, becomes part of the night soundscape. A sharp, piercing cry. It cuts across rows of cottages, yanking people from dreams with no mercy. You picture a whole neighborhood groaning in unison, rubbing eyes, fumbling for boots, cursing under breath. The factory whistle is the new rooster, only far louder and impossible to ignore. It is the invention of mechanical alarm, the intrusion of the industrial clock into the body's private rhythms. A quirky tidbit emerges. In some towns, professional knocker-uppers were hired to tap on windows with sticks or even shoot peas through straws to wake workers in time for their shifts. Imagine being roused at 4 a.m. by a stranger poking your shutters with a long pole. You cannot help but chuckle. Alarm clocks with human legs, prowling the streets before dawn. The thought makes you grateful for snooze buttons, even if you despise them. Historians still argue whether the industrial age truly shortened average sleep or merely reshaped it. Diaries reveal both exhausted workers lamenting their lack of rest and others adjusting to rigid patterns. Perhaps the real change was not quantity, but quality. Sleep no longer felt natural. It became duty, a brief reprieve granted by the factory's schedule. You sense the irony. Machines never tire, but humans must bend to match their pace. You walk through the mill village, hearing the coughs of children already at work, the shuffle of mothers preparing meals in the dark, the muttered complaints of fathers heading toward another shift. Inside small cottages, beds are shared, often by shifts. One family member sleeps while another works, trading spaces like possessions. Privacy is almost non-existent. You feel the weight of this rotation, the sense that even rest belongs to the clock. The streets are lit by new gas lamps, their glow unfamiliar after centuries of darkness. They banish shadows, but extend working hours, pushing sleep later. People marvel at the brightness, yet many grumble that it leaves no excuse for early rest. You pause beneath a lamp, the hiss of gas faint, moths flickering around the flame. Artificial light has begun to rewrite the very script of night. Humor slips in when you picture arguments over lamps. Some praised them as progress. Others cursed them for revealing every crack in brickwork and every smudge of soot. Imagine a factory worker muttering that he preferred the old days, when darkness at least gave him an excuse to stop. Now, with lamps burning, there is no reprieve, only endless illumination. You wander past the mill into the railway yard, where engines hiss and groan. Workers nap briefly on benches, heads tilted awkwardly, soot on their faces. These stolen moments are all the rest they receive. Mainstream accounts remind you that industrial schedules often ignored natural cycles, demanding wakefulness at odd hours. Night shifts became common, fragmenting rest into scraps. The body protested, but wages demanded compliance. Historians still argue whether these disrupted patterns gave rise to modern insomnia, or whether humans have always battled sleeplessness. What is certain is that complaints multiplied. Doctors wrote treatises on overwork. Ministers warned of moral decay caused by exhaustion, and workers themselves filled diaries with laments about fatigue. You hear their voices faintly, drifting through smoke. I cannot rest. The bell owns me. The industrial night carries its own strange lullaby. The clatter of wheels, the hiss of steam, the thrum of engines, all merge into a relentless rhythm. You let the sound wash over you, hypnotic in its repetition, though you know for those who lived it, the noise was often torture. Still, some must have grown accustomed, their dreams threaded with the pulse of machinery. Perhaps the first generation to dream in steam. You step into a crowded boarding house, where workers lie on straw mattresses crammed side by side. Some snore deeply, undisturbed by the racket outside, while others toss and turn, unable to silence their thoughts. A young boy mutters about the whistle, dreading its call. A woman pulls her shawl tighter, trying to block the draft from cracked windows. Sleep is thin here, fragile, vulnerable to intrusion. Yet it comes, because it must. Humor persists even in hardship. Imagine a worker jolted awake by the whistle, stumbling out the door half-dressed, only to realize it was a false alarm from a neighbor's kettle. Or picture the knocker-upper mistaking one cottage for another, rousing an indignant grandmother instead of the factory boy next door. Even in exhaustion, laughter flickered, small sparks against the darkness. The night stretches on, and you feel the shift. Sleep has changed. No longer tied to seasons or segmented into natural halves, it is pressed into the mold of industry. The body bends reluctantly, the mind follows uneasily, but both endure. Progress demands sacrifice, and rest is the easiest victim. You leave the boarding house and wander to the edge of the town. Smoke lingers low. The lamps burn steadily, and in the distance another whistle shrieks, summoning yet more bodies from their fragile dreams. You pause, imagining the whole world slowly surrendering its nights to machines, until even the stars seem secondary to chimneys. Ahead lies the Victorian era, where this new relationship with sleep will breed inventions, gadgets, and chemical cures. People will not merely complain. They will begin trying to fix sleep with tools, as though rest could be engineered like engines. With a final glance at the smoky village, you turn toward that world of vibrating chairs and strange elixirs, ready to explore how the 19th century tried to mechanize the act of dreaming. You step forward through the haze of coal smoke and the shriek of whistles into the more ornate corridors of the 19th century. The Victorian age spreads before you, a world of parlor rooms, polished wood, and a fascination with invention so fierce it spills even into the bedroom. Here, sleep is not accepted as it comes. It is tinkered with, experimented upon, and improved through an odd parade of gadgets and remedies. The Victorians treat rest like a machine that can be adjusted, greased, and coaxed into efficiency. You wander into a drawing room where polished brass glints in the firelight. On the table rests a curious contraption, a mechanical bed shaker powered by clockwork. A gentleman demonstrates proudly, cranking the gears until the bed rattles loudly enough to jolt even the heaviest sleeper. Mainstream history notes that alarm clocks were becoming common, but Victorians pushed further, inventing devices to physically drag people from slumber. You smile faintly, imagining yourself rolled right onto the floor at 6 o'clock sharp by some over-enthusiastic machine. Comfort, it seems, was negotiable if productivity could be improved. A quirky tidbit catches your eye. Advertisements from the period boasted of vibrating chairs meant to soothe nervous patients into sleep. You picture a stiff-backed Victorian lady perched nervously while the chair shudders beneath her, more like a mild earthquake than a lullaby. The faith in gadgetry was unshakable, even when the gadgets themselves were dubious. Some households even purchased weighted helmets designed to press gently on the skull, supposedly calming the restless mind. You cannot resist a chuckle at the image of dinner guests excusing themselves to strap on headgear before bed. Historians still argue whether these inventions were genuinely believed to work, or whether they thrived more on marketing than medical endorsement. The Victorians, after all, lived in an age of spectacle and novelty. A contraption did not need to cure insomnia. so long as it looked impressive in a catalog. The line between science and entertainment blurred, and sleep became yet another stage for human ingenuity or folly. You walk deeper into the city and find shelves stocked with bottles labeled night draft and sleeping syrup. Pharmacists sell mixtures of opium, alcohol, and various herbs, promising gentle rest to the weary. The air smells of camphor and sweet syrup. You imagine desperate parents dosing restless children, unaware of the dangers hidden in those concoctions. Mainstream history confirms that laudanum, a tincture of opium, was widely used, prescribed liberally for sleeplessness. For some, it worked. For others, it trapped them in addiction. You picture a housewife sipping her nightly draft, sinking quickly into heavy slumber, while her neighbors whispered both envy and concern. Humor creeps into the scene too. Imagine a man staggering to bed after too much soothing syrup, dreaming not of angels, but of elephants in waistcoats. Or picture a servant asked to fetch the night draft, but accidentally mixing in vinegar, leading to a startled yelp rather than restful snores. The Victorians may have sought control, but even their remedies could turn comical. Yet beneath the oddity lies a genuine anxiety. The industrial clock has tightened its grip, and sleep is treated as a resource that must be managed, not wasted. Physicians publish treatises urging regular schedules, fresh air, and firm mattresses. They warn against reading too much in bed, claiming it overstimulates the brain. You glance at a pamphlet declaring that one should retire precisely at 10 and rise precisely at 6. And you smirk, knowing few followed it perfectly. Still, the advice reflects a world increasingly obsessed with order. You step into a bedroom decorated with heavy drapes, ornate wallpaper, and a towering 4-poster bed. On the nightstand sits a peculiar lamp filled with colored oils, marketed as a dream inducer. Its flickering light dances oddly across the walls, meant to lull the mind into sleep. You recline on the feather mattress, feeling its softness, yet the room feels cluttered with objects claiming to command your dreams. Perhaps the Victorians trusted inventions because they feared their own thoughts. Historians still argue whether these sleep gadgets reflected genuine medical science or cultural anxiety about rest. Was it about health or about productivity? The Victorian age was crowded with invention, but also with fear. Fear of wasting time, fear of idleness, fear of appearing weak. Sleep, once left to the rhythm of nature, had become another arena for self-discipline. You wander next into a chemist's shop. Bottles gleam on the shelves, labels promising relief from insomnia, hysteria, or night terrors. The language is flowery, confident, designed to sell peace of mind in liquid form. You smell bitter herbs, sweet syrups, and alcohol mingling in the air. A mother purchases a bottle for her restless child, reassured by the ornate script. You sigh, knowing that for many, these remedies brought not peace, but long-term harm. Yet at the time, they were lifelines, the only options available in a world racing too quickly for rest. Humor has its place even here. Imagine a gentleman proudly demonstrating his new vibrating mattress to guests, only for it to break down mid-performance, rattling like a drunkard until the whole household bursts into laughter. Or picture a family dosing their dog with sleeping syrup after it barked too much at night, only to discover the poor animal snoring louder than the master. Even in the seriousness of progress, absurdity lurked. Night in Victorian cities was rarely silent. Gas lamps hissed, carriages rattled, and factories hummed. Sleep was chased with gadgets, syrups, and schedules, yet it remained elusive for many. You feel sympathy for those who lay awake despite all remedies, staring at ornate ceilings, waiting for dawn. Perhaps their very obsession with control made rest harder to find. You step outside, breathing the cool air. The city sprawls before you, restless and buzzing, its nights illuminated by invention and its days driven by industry. Sleep is no longer sacred. It is something to conquer, to manage, to monetize. Yet even here, beneath all the rattling gadgets and syrup bottles, the human body still demands surrender. And surrender it does, eventually, despite every effort to mechanize it. You look ahead to the 20th century, where laboratories will begin to study brainwaves, where scientists will place electrodes on sleepers, and where sleep itself will be mapped like a frontier. The Victorians tried to tinker with rest. The modern world will try to dissect it completely. You take one last glance at the vibrating chairs and syrup bottles, then step into the glow of neon, where science replaces superstition and the mystery of dreams is hooked to machines. You leave behind the cluttered parlors of the Victorian age and step into a room humming with electricity. The walls are plain, the lamps clinical, and the air carries the sterile tang of disinfectant. Gone are the vibrating chairs and syrup bottles. Instead, machines hum quietly, wires dangle from headboards, and notebooks lie open on sterile desks. This is the 20th century, the dawn of modern sleep science, where rest becomes an object not of superstition or gadgets, but of experiment and observation. You pause by a window where night falls across the city. Neon lights flicker outside. Traffic hums far below. Yet inside this laboratory, silence reigns. A volunteer lies on a narrow cot, electrodes attached to their scalp, chest, and arms. Their breath rises and falls in slow rhythm. Nearby, a researcher peers at a screen, watching the faint dance of lines tracing brain activity. For the first time in history, sleep is no longer just guessed at. It is measured. Mainstream history confirms that in the 1920s and 1930s, scientists began using electroencephalography, EEG, to map electrical patterns in the brain, discovering that sleep was not uniform, but layered, shifting in stages. You feel the weight of the discovery. Sleep has structure, cycles, architecture, hidden beneath its quiet surface. The quirky tidbit that catches your eye comes from one experimenter who reported that subjects dreamed vividly during periods of rapid eye movement, what became known as REM sleep. Imagine the surprise when researchers realized that the closed eyes of sleepers flickered frantically, as though watching unseen dramas unfold. One scientist even joked that the brain never truly slept. It just dimmed the lights and ran its own midnight cinema. You picture a projectionist inside the skull, threading reels of dream film, laughing quietly at the surreal plots. Historians still argue whether these discoveries transformed public life immediately or remained confined to laboratories for decades. Certainly, the popular imagination caught on slowly. For most, sleep remained personal, mysterious, even after researchers revealed its measurable rhythms. Yet the groundwork was laid, and soon textbooks would teach children that the night was not one long plunge, but a cycle repeating every 90 minutes. Light sleep, deep sleep, dream. You marvel at how ordinary people's nights, once divided into first and second sleep, were now divided by brain waves. You wander deeper into the lab. The machines hum softly, pens scratching lines across long rolls of paper. The sight is strangely hypnotic, as though you are listening to sleep itself draw its portrait. The researcher scribbles notes. Stage 1, Stage 2, REM. Each shift in the sleeper's breath is mirrored by a spike or dip on the chart. The once mysterious night is now a landscape mapped in ink. Yet watching, you sense how little is truly solved. The lines record, but they do not explain. Why we dream, why we need such cycles, remains unanswered. Outside the lab, the 20th century continues to reshape sleep. Cities brighten with electric lights, erasing darkness. Trains thunder past at midnight. Airplanes roar overhead. Radios and televisions buzz into the small hours. Sleep becomes harder to protect, invaded by technology and shifting schedules. You step into an apartment block, peering through windows. A factory worker snores after a night shift. A teenager reads under covers by flashlight. A soldier writes a letter before collapsing into shallow slumber. Rest no longer follows the village bell or the monastic schedule. It bends to the demands of modern life. Humor emerges even in the lab. You picture volunteers waking to discover electrodes glued stubbornly to their hair, grumbling that science may explain dreams, but cannot. Explain how to wash out adhesive, or imagine a researcher caught nodding off while observing, only to be reminded that he was supposed to study sleep, not join it. Even in the age of data, drowsiness refuses to be disciplined. Mainstream accounts note the rise of sleep medicine in the mid-20th century. Insomnia, once dismissed as nerves or moral weakness, became a medical condition. Doctors prescribed barbiturates, later benzodiazepines, to help restless patients. Pharmacies filled with pills, promising dreamless nights. Some found relief, others fell into dependency. You picture a middle-aged man popping a tablet, sighing as the world finally blurs into silence, unaware of the long-term consequences hidden in the pill's chemistry. Sleep was tamed by medicine, but not without cost. Historians still argue whether modern society gained more than it lost by medicalizing sleep. On one hand, countless patients found relief. On the other, reliance on pharmaceuticals reshaped expectations, teaching people that rest should be instant, perfect, engineered. You sense the irony. The more science uncovered, the more anxious people became about not sleeping correctly. Insomnia transformed from nuisance to crisis, and the hunt for solutions grew frantic. You drift into another room, this one cluttered with film reels and typewriters. Documentaries and magazines proclaim the mysteries of dreaming, speculating wildly about meaning. Freud looms here, declaring dreams the royal road to the unconscious, while others dismiss them as random noise. You picture Freud stroking his beard gravely, insisting your dream of losing teeth reveals secret desire, while a neuroscientist across the room rolls his eyes. The debate remains unresolved, half science, half art. Yet, despite the arguments, the sheer wonder of dreams persists. The discovery of REM gave proof that the brain remains wildly active at night. Sleep was no longer absence, but another form of life, one rich with imagery and meaning. You imagine lying in a lab cot, wires sprouting from your head, yet in your mind's eye, you are running across fields, flying over rooftops, or speaking with strangers who vanish on waking. The duality is absurd, the body confined, the mind unbounded. You step outside again, into the hum of mid-century streets. Neon glows, car horns blare, factories roar. People hurry, sleep less, work more. The irony sharpens. As science maps the cycles of rest, society erodes them. Television flickers deep into the night, Shift work expands, and cities never sleep. The laboratory records patterns, but the world refuses to honor them. Humor slips in one last time. Imagine someone proudly announcing that they read all about REM sleep, only to yawn through the explanation. Or picture a businessman insisting that science proves he needs only 4 hours, while his colleagues smirk at his constant dozing. Knowledge does not always bring wisdom. The lab fades, the neon dims, and you feel the pull of the present day. Modern sleep science continues to chase mysteries with brain scanners and endless studies. Yet even now, the core questions remain unanswered. Why we dream? Why rest restores? Why sleep refuses to yield to full explanation? Historians still argue whether we are closer to solving the puzzle or merely drawing prettier maps of the unknown. You walk slowly down a corridor of glowing screens, past cots lined with volunteers, past machines scribbling the secret language of the night. At the end of the hall, a door opens, revealing the blur of the modern world. Phones glowing, alarms buzzing, studies piling up. The journey is almost complete. Ahead waits not science alone, but reflection, the lingering mystery of why, after centuries of theories, we still do not fully understand the simplest act of lying down and closing our eyes. You pause at the threshold. Behind you stretch centuries of myths, rituals, and debates. Ahead lies the unresolved present. You breathe deeply, feeling the hum of machines around you, and step forward into the confusion of modern sleep. You emerge from the stark corridors of laboratories into the restless hum of the present age, where sleep is both endlessly studied and endlessly elusive. Screens glow from every corner, alarms ping from phones, and glowing billboards wash the streets with false daylight long after the sun has set. Humanity now knows more about sleep than ever before, and yet you realize the mystery remains. Scientists map waves and stages, but ordinary people still lie awake, wondering why they cannot drift off. The paradox is almost comic. Centuries of myths, rituals, and machines, and still you toss in bed, sighing into the dark. Mainstream history reminds you that sleep science advanced dramatically in the 20th and 21st centuries. Brain imaging revealed activity deep in the cortex. Studies tracked the role of melatonin, and researchers tied poor sleep to countless health problems. The more they discovered, the more precious rest seemed. Yet for all these findings, society strained sleep harder than ever, demanding longer hours, brighter nights, faster mornings. You feel the contradiction pressing close, the knowledge that rest is vital, but modern life rarely allows enough. A quirky tidbit emerges from recent experiments with extreme sleep patterns. Some people try polyphasic schedules, napping in short bursts around the clock, convinced it boosts productivity. Others retreat to sensory deprivation chambers, hoping silence will lure them into deeper slumber. You picture someone proudly explaining their 6-nap regimen, only to yawn halfway through the sentence. Even in the age of data, sleep invites eccentric solutions, each promising to conquer the unyielding night. Historians still argue whether modern sleep is worse than in past centuries. Some claim electric light and screens have robbed us of rest, while others point out that medieval peasants battled fleas, drafts, and midnight interruptions. Perhaps the truth is that sleep has always been precarious, shaped by culture more than biology. Your own era is simply another chapter, filled with glowing distractions instead of creaking rafters. The battle remains the same: how to yield to rest in a world that resists silence. You glance around the modern bedroom. A phone blinks on the nightstand, tracking every toss and turn with cheerful graphs. A white noise machine hums softly in the corner. The bed itself is sculpted memory foam, promising perfect alignment. Comfort is abundant, yet anxiety lingers. You chuckle softly, realizing that even with all the gadgets, many people still scroll until dawn, sabotaging the very rest they claim to crave. Perhaps the simplest truth has never changed. Sleep comes when you stop chasing it. The air grows quieter, softer, as you reflect on the long arc of history. From ancient myths of wandering souls, to monks rising at midnight bells, to millers measuring grain by flickering torchlight, to nobles drawing velvet curtains, to Victorians rattling their beds with inventions. Each age carried its own rituals and fears. Sleep has been divine, suspicious, luxurious, mechanical, medical, and still mysterious. You smile faintly, sensing how this continuity comforts. Even across centuries, across cultures, humanity lies in darkness, dreaming. You recall some of the oddest beliefs. Egyptian priests cataloging dreams like weather reports. Greek philosophers warning that vapors clouded the brain. Villagers convinced owls foretold death. Victorians strapping helmets to their heads. Each seems absurd now, yet each was a sincere attempt to explain the inexplicable. And you wonder if someday, people will look back at sleep trackers and melatonin gummies with the same bemused smile. The present always feels certain until time turns it into curiosity. Humor lingers even in reflection. You picture Aristotle sighing at modern EEG charts, muttering that he was close all along, or a medieval monk glaring at your glowing phone, insisting that true insomnia is chanting psalms barefoot in the cold. Even across time, you recognize yourself in them. The same weary struggle to close your eyes. The same small jokes to soften the fatigue. The laboratory's machines hum faintly in memory. The village's owls still echo. The noble's curtains sway in the dark. All of them merge into one long continuity of human night. You sense that sleep is not merely biological, but profoundly cultural, shaped by the stories people tell themselves when the world dims. Whether dangerous, divine, or mechanical, it remains the one ritual everyone shares. You stretch slightly, letting your breath slow, letting your thoughts ease. The journey winds to a close, but the mystery endures. Perhaps that is its charm. If sleep were fully solved, it would lose its wonder. Better to leave it unsolved. A soft frontier we cross nightly, carrying questions that dissolve into dreams. Now the pace slows, words lengthen, and the air itself feels heavier with calm. You let the long trail of centuries fall away, leaving only the quiet weight of your own body sinking into rest. The voices of priests, philosophers, millers, nobles, and scientists fade like echoes in a distant hall, until you hear nothing but the rhythm of your breathing. Each inhale feels cool. Each exhale drifts like mist, and you sense yourself softening into the mattress beneath you. The room around you blurs. Shadows stretch long and indistinct, blending with the air. Your eyelids grow heavier, as though centuries themselves press them gently closed. You picture a candle guttering slowly, its flame trembling before it surrenders to darkness. In that fading light, you feel the comfort of letting go, knowing that sleep comes not by force, but by yielding. There is nothing left to solve, nothing to prove, nothing to weigh or measure. You are simply here, suspended between wakefulness and dreaming, safe in the quiet. The night holds you the way it held every soul before, with steady patience. Allow yourself to drift, unhurried, unworried, carried by silence, deeper and deeper, until even the thought of listening dissolves.